Yes, yes, yes. All right, so if you weren't here the first week, there's a notebook out there for you. If you were here the first week but not last week, there's a sheet of papers out there for you, and then there's tonight's papers. So hopefully everybody got those. I want to share with you some stories I ran across about bad experiences people have had who have rented out their Airbnb. And just here's a couple of them. This one said the renting party, so this was a 3-bedroom house advertised for 6 people. The renting party said, yeah, we're bringing 6. But then they showed up and it was 6 adults and 2 children. And here's what happened. They didn't do any dishes. They left food everywhere. They broke dishes. They rearranged the outdoor furniture. They picked flowers, smoked inside, left vomit on the floor, damaged furniture, and left miscellaneous mystery stains. And it says, and then in a beautiful final touch, they asked for a late checkout and then left early. This one. A host reported that guests were supposed to check out at 11 a.m. The next morning, the male guest was completely naked in the host's house and refused to leave. The host repeatedly asked him to leave, eventually contacting Airbnb and had to involve local authorities. After the guest finally left, they allegedly dumped trash outside a neighbor's house, resulting in a 150 pounds, so it's British, fine for the host. And that reminds me of a story heard years ago that when the Clintons were leaving the White House and George W. Bush was coming in, that Hillary's brother had been staying at the White House. And he asked the transition team if it'd be all right if he stayed a little longer. Right? So, I want you to think about, how do we be good guests in other people's backyards? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. But we want to review. And so remember, if you have any questions, you can go to your page there, your QR code, and you can submit them anonymously if you want. And then we'll be addressing those at the end. So if during this time you have any question, feel free to type that in there. All right, so let's review. We started the first week with picking 5 relationships you want to work on. And these are your laboratory. These are the relationships we're going to try to practice these things. And we talked about that our first approach is often, what is the other person doing wrong in the relationship? Instead, we need to come and ask ourselves, what might I be doing wrong in the relationship? And the concept of boundaries and backyards. To think of relationships as neighbors, and I have my backyard and you have your backyard. And by backyard, we mean if it's my thoughts, emotions, or behavior, it's my backyard. And if it's your thoughts, emotions, or behavior, it's your backyard. And that all the power that I have in this relationship is over my backyard and my gate. That's all that I have power about. We'll review about gates in a moment. And remember, the boundary exists for 2 reasons. One is to keep me out of your backyard, and the other is to keep you out of my backyard. Okay? All right, and then we talked about the concept of owning my backyard, meaning I create my own thoughts and emotions and behavior, nobody else does. Now, the way we talk, we don't talk that way. So I went to a therapist years ago, had this dating problem, and I'd come in and he'd say, well, how's it going? I said, well, you know, Robin made me mad this week. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to say that in here. I said, I'm not. He said, no, you have to say Robin did X, Y, Z, and you made yourself mad. And I thought, what in the world, right? But I now realize he was right, okay? All right, so last week we talked about the role of gates. That we have these gates between our backyards that open and close at various times, and so the relationship is often about navigating the gates. And when we see that the other person's gate is closed, so they seem shut down, not open, we try to figure out what's going on. It may simply be they're tired, they need some alone time. So in my marriage, my wife will be quiet and I'll think, what did I do wrong? And she'll say, you didn't do anything wrong, I'm just tired. But my nervous system jumps to, if you're quiet, it must mean I did something wrong, right? Now, on the other hand, sometimes their gate is closed because they don't feel safe. Something has happened and they're kind of shut down. And then we talked about that there are times we have to close our gate. That it's not a good time right now, or I don't feel safe. And that closing a gate is often temporary. Think about it when you've had a conflict with somebody and you don't talk for a while, but then you come back together. You're closing your gate until your system feels safe enough to re-engage. So having a closed gate is not a bad thing, it's actually a part of a relationship. Okay, and then we talked about the 5 levels of conversation. Reporter talk. Water cooler talk. Is that it? What was Temple? Hallway talk, right? Hallway talk, reporter talk, and then intellectual talk where we share our thoughts and opinions. And at this stage, it's critical that we allow the other to hold a different opinion. Because we won't get below this one if we don't feel safe with each other. And so if we start, well, you're wrong, no, you have to think this, no, that's when it levels out there. Okay, and then we talked about the 3 positions that we take in relationships: passive, assertive, and aggressive. And that assertive is talking about yourself simply for the goal of being known, not to change the other person. Now, we may want a change, and that's a part of describing me. But if it's, I'm telling you this because you need to change, then it is technically aggressive. It's focusing on the other person's backyard. Okay? And the problem with going passive is it does it for keeping the peace, but it's not really peace. It's just sweeping it under the rug for a while. And the problem with going aggressive is I'm focused on trying to change the other. So, in a conflict, when you don't know what to do, in most situations, the goal is assertive engagement. I want to avoid the problem. I want to not talk with them. What I need to do is try to engage, but do it the right way. And so last week we talked about when we engage, I'm going to talk about me and my backyard, not yours. Tonight, though, we're going to figure out how do we talk or listen to the other persons. Okay. Now, I gave you a sheet last week, the one that says listening boundaries. And for many of you, this is stuff you've heard plenty of times before, and it's the idea of reflective listening. That the way I'm going to listen is I'm going to imagine that I work the drive-thru at McDonald's. And somebody pulls up, and I say, welcome to McDonald's, may I take your order? And they tell me what they want. Okay? And my job is to just state it back to them. You say you wanted a quarter pounder with cheese and fries and a chocolate shake, and then ask for confirmation. Is that correct? That is reflective listening. Here's what I heard you say. Is that correct? Now imagine you pull up to McDonald's and you order, and they say, you can't have a cheeseburger, you fat slob. Who do you think you, right? That's how we often talk to each other, right? We hear something that triggers us and we attack. Or imagine you pull up and they say, welcome to McDonald's, can take your order, and you tell them what you want and there's silence. What happens now? What do we typically do then?
Are you there?
Yeah, hello. So it's not simply about transferring information from party A to party B. It's letting party A know that party B heard the information. Okay? And that's why we want to reflect it back. Okay. Now, one of the struggles that happens is we hear something the other person said and it triggers us. And instead of practicing reflective listening, we say something. Maybe even something apparently or intended to be helpful. But as we all know, that doesn't always go well. Maybe you've seen this video, but let's watch it. All right. Does that sound familiar? All right. Especially stereotypically, guys and gals. All right. Why do you think he said what he said? Okay, he saw what he saw. I'm sorry.
I said he wasn't blind to see.
Okay, he saw. Okay. Why do you feel like he felt the need to say it? Because when he saw it, that's his backyard. Why did he feel the need?
He can fix it.
Okay, he thought he could fix it.
Because she was complaining about it, so he could help her.
Okay, what do you think he was feeling inside? What emotions do you think he was feeling that led to him feeling the need to say what he said? Okay, empathy for her. Yeah. What do you feel as a parent when you see your child doing something you think they're going to regret? What emotions do you feel? That's what you want to do. What do you feel? What are the emotions? Protection. Okay, protection? Frustrating? Yeah, it's usually some form of anxiety. And I use the word anxiety very broadly here. Any kind of disturbance. It disturbs me when I see this, and it may be intended from empathy, but often there's also a piece of anxiety. Right? So when I hear my kids have done something, instead of slowing down and listening first. Right? And that's what she's asking for. I just want you to hear me. Why do you think she wants him to hear her? Why is that important? Or let me phrase this. What do you think it feels like to her when he says, well, we just need to get that nail out of your head? Okay? Ah, yeah. You're making it trivial. Oh, it's just a simple nail, right? As if you didn't know there's a nail in your head, or you've never even thought about this, right? And what you said? Jim, what was your? Okay. Right? So, she probably feels unheard or it's trivialized.
That was what it was. She needed to be heard.
Yes. Right. And to ask why. We think, no, just get the nail out of your head. But from her position, it probably feels like, you think I'm not smart enough to know that this nail that's been in my head, right? I get it as a satire, but you get the idea. Okay. So, what we're going to do is you're going to get in pairs, if you're comfortable doing that. And you're going to use the listening boundary and the talking boundary sheet. So one of you is going to be the talking person, and the other person is going to be the listening person. And I want the talking person to follow that format, just so you're practicing it. And then the listening person, you're going to follow what's on the sheet there. Okay? You're working McDonald's, you're taking their order, you're repeating it back, and you're asking for confirmation. Any questions on this? Yeah. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah. Let me get you one out here. Okay. Yeah, from last week. Okay, cool. Yeah, so everybody should have one that says talking boundary, and everybody should have one that says listening boundary, or at least your pair should have one. You can swap if you don't each have one. So with the packet from last week included the listening boundary. It's got some red ink on it.
So what is it you're wanting us to talk about?
Anything you want. The talking boundary, you're practicing that format that sounds very clinical and not normal, but we're training our brain to think a certain way. But the bigger exercise is about the listening person practicing reflective listening. So we'll take a few minutes to do that. I'm sorry?
Practice
Yeah.
reflective listening.
Yeah, so if she's talking to you, you're just going to follow this and say, what I heard you say is, and you repeat it back. Look in last week's. Or you can, yeah. Anything at all you want to talk about? So let me give you a suggestion. Think about when somebody's speaking in a foreign language and they have a translator. We're going to share short bits for the other person to reflect back. If you go a long story, then you're trying to remember all the, right? So break it into bits.
All right, okay.
Okay, so let's pause for just a minute. We're going to get back to this. Now, there's a piece I want to add. Well, first, any questions or anything you noticed you want to share? Yeah.
How do you turn off the brain thinking of questions you want to ask?
Yes.
Put a nail in your forehead.
Yeah. That's a good question. How? I'm trying to think. I think, I was going to say part of it is just being curious, but that's also part of the question, right? But maybe this helps. So this piece I want you to, now we're going to add. You really feel heard when what they reflect back is the emotion, not just the details, not the reporter talk. When you can say something like, you had a car wreck today and you were terrified, right? When you reflect back the emotion, that's when they really feel heard. So part of it is trying to listen for the emotion that I'm going to reflect back instead of all the detail stuff, right? And that's what she's wanting to nail. That sounds really hard. I'm trying to connect emotionally, not just information. So now add that piece into it. So let's continue. All right. How'd that go? Any questions, thoughts, feedback? So this is what
It's hard not to answer
yeah,
instead of reflect.
yeah. Think about if we communicated this way all the time, we wouldn't get much accomplished, right? You know, every time you got an email, you had to send an email back that says, here's what I read that you wrote to me, right? And then they write back, here's what I read, right? So, what I tell my clients is this. For everyday life, we don't have to try to do this. It's good if you can. But when it's obvious that I have wandered into a minefield, something just blew up, I need to switch to I statements. I'm going to talk about me, not you, and reflective listening, right? And so, but that's hard to do. So try to put that in your mind. When it's obvious something's going wrong, those are your two tools you go to. I statements talk about me and reflective listening. I don't have to use it all the time. Okay. And it's okay to ask, could you repeat that? To ask, can you repeat that? I didn't get that, right? Okay. Now, everything we've talked about of these past few sessions is what it looks like when it goes right. This is the model we want to move towards. And I'm sorry if I've repeated this, if I'm repeating myself. I don't remember who I've told what to. So most couples, when they come to couples counseling, if you ask them, why are you coming in? They say, well, we have communication problems. And so most couples counseling taught communication skills. And it all sounded wonderful in the office, but then they'd go home and have a fight. So they'd come back and go, well, let's practice this again, right? And they'd go home and have a fight. So one researcher by the name of Sue Johnson out of Canada recognized this. And she concluded couples don't have communication problems. They communicate fine on these subjects, but on these, they lose the ability. So why? And it's because something triggers them. Okay? And once we get triggered, our ability to do this goes away. And that's why studying how you do this and just say, okay, good luck, doesn't work. It's a model to shoot towards, but there's a bigger problem. And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail here in just a moment. But I want to give you a technique that I was taught that can help on how not to react. Now, we won't bat 1,000, right? Anytime you do implement this technique is a win, but you won't most of the time. And I'll describe it this way. So I'll pick on you, Chris. If I called you a chair, would you be offended? If I said you're one lousy fireman, would you be offended? No. Okay. So what happens, the first one is so nonsensical, our mind just goes, whatever. In essence, we close our gate. That's ridiculous. The second one, I try to find something that we may take more personal. And so what he could say is, have you ever followed me to a fire? Have you ever seen me? Where's your evidence that I'm a bad fireman, right? That's what we would hope would happen, that his gate would say, I reject this information because there's no fact behind it. Now, if you'd like to talk about it further, we can. Okay, now, I want you to imagine that in all reality, I believe that Chris is a chair. I believe that right now, remind me your name? Patricia. Patricia is sitting here. She came tonight, and there's a wooden chair sitting on the chair next to her. If that's what I truly believe, What does that tell you about me? I'm crazy. Yes, I'm delusional. Okay? Now, let's say that's what I believe. And I tell the chair, you're a chair. Why am I doing that? I don't tell this chair it's a chair. I don't tell this table it's a table. So whenever people speak to us, they're giving us two pieces of very important information. They're telling us their reality, and they're telling us that they want us to know their reality. Okay? So I had a professor one time that said, when dealing with people who are delusional or have dementia, you cannot speak rationally to them, but you can start a fight. Right? So if you've ever worked with somebody that has Alzheimer's, and you go, hey, Dad, I'm glad to see you. Get away from me. Who are you? Right? I'm your son. Stop it. And the more you try to convince them, the more it backfires, because they literally see a different reality. And all you are is some stranger trying to get into their house. And you're never going to change their mind. Okay? So when people speak to us, they're speaking to us like a person with Alzheimer's, meaning they are telling us their reality. They're not talking about us, even though they're talking about us. Does that make sense? So it's a way of, when they talk bad about my backyard, to hear it as they're telling me something about their backyard, meaning these are their thoughts about my backyard. Okay? So ideally, if somebody came up to me after Sunday and said, that was a terrible sermon, you don't know what you're talking about, ideally, I would tell myself, that person just called me a chair. Right? Maybe I want to hear more about this, or maybe I think, okay, fine, right? So here's how I've learned to apply this. I remember an argument my wife and I had, and she said, you never do the dishes around here. I said, what are you talking about? I did them a week ago. She goes, yeah, a week ago, right? And I said, fine, if I'm not going to get any credit, I won't ever do the dishes. Now what I've learned is if she says something like, you never do the dishes around here, and I feel myself starting to react, and that's the cue, I've got to catch it before it, and what I do is I literally tell myself, she called you a chair. She's telling you her reality, and honey, if you're watching this, you have the right to be a raving lunatic, right? Give the other person the right to be wrong. Does that make sense? Because what we're reacting to is something they said triggered us. We heard it as a threat. And when we hear it as a threat, then the part we're going to talk about here in a minute takes over, okay? And so I learned this from my mentor that taught me this, Reverend Daniel Gallen. He's a therapist, taught me this, and this idea of just, she called me a chair, right? You may use tomato, basketball, whatever, right? But the idea is they are simply telling me their reality. I don't have to react to it. Now, second part of this.
But do you go do dishes? You go do dishes then?
I might, or I might think, no, I did the dishes plenty, right? So I get to decide that where we're trying to get to is a place where we respond instead of react. And I describe respond as, imagine you could hit pause and you could go, okay, let me think about this. What's the best response? And then hit play and start the action, right? And sometimes it may be go do the dishes. Sometimes it might be, no, the fact is I do the dishes around here all the time and you never do, right? And so we have to work that out, right? Okay. Years ago, I bought a course, one of these to listen to, on argumentation. And by that they meant a formal argument. I lay out my facts and you lay out your facts, right? And it was on cassette tape, so that tells you how long ago it was, right? And I was listening to it, driving to Colorado, and I still can see where I was in New Mexico when the guy said this, and it has stuck with me. We only argue with people whose opinions we care about. So I ask myself, why do I care about this person's opinion? If I'm just walking down the street and there's a stranger and says something to me, I really shouldn't care. So why do I care? And that's what we have to figure out. When someone says something that triggers me, why do I care? And it's because my nervous system is interpreting it as a threat of some kind. And we've got to figure out, what's the threat it feels like? And then ask myself, is that true or not? Okay. Now, why do we react? Why does all this stuff sound so good, but it's so hard, if not impossible, to do in the moment? And the reason is we have a little part of our brain called the amygdala, and it is on the constant lookout for threats. Think of a radar, right? And when it senses a threat, it goes into action and creates this reaction in our body. And you've been there, you know it. Okay? And here's the interesting thing. The amygdala is in the part of your brain where there are very few neural synapses, connections between the eyes and ears and the amygdala versus those connecting to the thinking brain. In other words, we might say the road to the amygdala is shorter than the road to the thinking brain. And therefore, the amygdala gets the signal first. And when the amygdala gets the signal, it shuts down the thinking brain. Why? Well, that's how we're created. Some would say through evolution, that's how whatever. Because when you have a threat, you don't want to stop and go, I think that might be a lion. I wonder what I should do. You want your body to just react to keep you alive. And so that's why we're designed, a car pulls out in front of you, you don't want to have to think. You want to react, because that saves you. The problem is, for many of us, our amygdala feels too threatened. It sees threats that aren't threats. Okay? And here's what it does. This is fascinating. So first, there's a very short connection between the senses and the amygdala, so it gets the signal first. The second thing is, it works off of very vague and coarse information. It's looking for anything that's a close approximation to the threat. Does that make sense? So let me give you an example. So years ago, my wife had made this barbecue shredded beef. And I was doing dishes, right? And we have this white sink. And so I'm washing out the crock pot on the side with the faucet. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a scorpion in my sink. And I went, ah! And then I looked and it wasn't a scorpion, it was a piece of shredded beef. The same approximate color, and the beef was split like that. And my mind thought that was a scorpion pincer. I reacted before I even thought scorpion. It just said, something over there looks like a threat I've seen before, jump back, right? And so I go, where did I learn that? Well, when I was a kid, growing up in Oklahoma, I still remember when my family went to Osage State Park, and my brothers and I in August, the heat, went in the bathroom, and there were some scorpions fighting. And they went, oh, and they got sticks, and they're poking them, and we're seeing these scorpions getting angry. And even right now, my skin is crawling describing it, right? So I'm terrified of scorpions. And all my brain had to do was see something that might be the same color and approximation of a scorpion, and it instantly went, okay? And that's what our brain does. That's what keeps us alive. But it can also create problems, as you know. Okay? And that's why I have couples, and they'll say, well, honey, I'm sorry about what happened. I'll think before I react next time. And I think, no, you won't, because you can't. You're not wired that way yet. So what do? Well, we have to teach our amygdala over a long period that some of those threats are not threats. And this is where trauma comes in. And trauma doesn't have to be war or violence. It can be, I always use this example with my clients, which tells me, I think this is my trauma. I remember in the 3rd grade in Oklahoma at PE, we're lined up to play kickball, and they pick 2 students to pick teams. And what's your greatest fear as a kid when they're picking teams? Right. I'm in the lower, right? That was my trauma. Now we would go, I'll get over it. Well, my amygdala hadn't gotten over it. And so I have to work through the things to figure out what was going on there. And that's what counseling and treatment does, is it's trying to teach the amygdala that what you experienced is no longer still present. Now, our intellectual brain knows it's not present. Our emotional brain doesn't. And that's why we always feel it in the present tense. Because to our emotional brain, it's a scorpion going to jump out and attack me. Right? All right. Now, one way to do that is what's known as exposure therapy. And that is, I'm going to gently start to expose myself to the threat at first in my mind. So, for example, if I have a fear of flights, I'm not going to drive out to DFW. I'm going to sit at home and think about what's it like to drive to DFW and have my body start to, right? I'm going to work through that until I can actually start to drive there. Then I'm going to slowly expose myself to it. That's one of the techniques. There's a lot of others, but you get the idea that we have to teach our brain that the activation doesn't necessarily mean it's a threat. We're not going to make the activation go away, because that's how we're made. We're going to have to learn this activation is not a danger. And what we're trying to do is interrupt the process. And the way you do that, one of the ways, is you become very aware of your physical body. So think about what you feel when someone says something that hurts your feelings or you feel like it's a threat. And you feel your body tense, you feel your heart rate go up, whatever it may be for you. If you can get in tune to that, that's your clue, I've been activated. And what I want to learn is to be able to be activated and regulate myself instead of give in to it. But that's a long-term process. Okay? All right. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to get in your groups again. And we're going to try something. Now, it's not going to work exactly as I wish it would, because you know about it. So if you know the threat is coming, our mind will interrupt the process. That's why it's really good to say to somebody, hey, I need to talk to you about something. This may upset you. What you're doing is you're teaching them to get in their thinking brain, right? It's that when you hit out of the blue that it, okay? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to try to say something to the other person that will trigger them. Now, it's a struggle because they know it's coming, so it may not work, but without getting them so upset that they slap you in the face and leave, try to think of something that might trigger the other person. And the person on the receiving end, you're going to practice your listening skills. Does that make sense? Any questions? And let's see what happens. Okay? So decide who's doing which first. Okay. What did you experience? Was it hard to listen? I get it that you knew it was coming, but well, think about yeah.
I was gonna say, I wanted to explain why I felt the way I did, as opposed to reflect to what he said. I want to make it about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't understand.
Yes. Yeah.
Not the nail.
Yeah. Right. And so to recognize, why is it I interrupt when I interrupt? Right? Why is it I say the things I say in response to the other person? And where does that come from? What got triggered in me? And that's where we work on my backyard. So I think about an experience I had with somebody that got under my skin, and for days I could not stop thinking about it. And I would think about, why did this person say or do that? And then I had to tell myself, this has nothing to do with them. This is about the story I'm telling myself about it. Why do I feel threatened? And once I could get there, I could make some progress. But as long as I was thinking, why did this person say or do what they did? I was caught in the loop, right? So that's why we stay in our own backyard. I can rearrange my shrubs and I can move things to make it the way I want. I can't do that in the neighbor's yard. So I have to figure out what happened to my yard. Okay.
What if they ask
Yes.
you a question?
Mm-hmm.
If she asks me a question,
Uh-huh.
do I answer that
Well, I would think so.
or just reflect what she asked?
I would say it depends. Are you in a minefield argument, right? Why did you ask that, right? Or I heard you ask this, what, right? But sometimes it's just, I'm going to answer it. And part of that is the safety of the relationship. Do I feel safe answering your question or not?
So when she asks the question, that means she's giving me
Yeah.
permission to answer it.
Yes. Just like if I want to tell somebody, hey, I see you've got a sharp knife in your hand, would you like some feedback? And if they say, yeah, then I can. If they say, no, mind your own business, okay, right? All right, I want you to look at this document here you got. So there's a psychiatrist by the name of Dan Siegel, I think is right, that came up with the idea of the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance says, within this range right here, when we are emotionally in this range, we can respond pretty well. Not always perfectly. It doesn't mean we're just always calm. There can be passion behind it, but it's still within a certain range. Okay? And when things start getting agitated, now we're moving out of the window. And if we can't interrupt it, we're going to move into what they call hyperarousal. I'm going to get angry and anxious and out of control and scared, and the nervous system is taking over. And now, in essence, the animal part of me is just trying to protect me, right? And then on the other side, you can have hypoarousal. That's where I just finally shut down. Can't take it anymore, right? Now, the important thing is to recognize the window of tolerance is not set. It's moving. Some days and sometimes the window's open wide and I can handle a lot. Sometimes it's very narrow. And it tells you on there things that shrink your window and things that expand your window. So I've noticed, and it's not anything new, you all know it. So my wife and I will say irritating things to each other when we're trying to sleep, right? Why can't you, right? Because that's one of those times the window, especially when you're really tired, the window is, I can't handle much, right? Same things happens when you're hungry, right? When you're not feeling well, when you've got a lot of stress in your life. So those are the things on the other side you can do. Grounding techniques means get in touch with your five senses. What am I? Seeing, tasting, touching. Because when you do that, what happens is it pulls your mind into the present moment. There is no past, there is no future. There's only this moment in the green chairs and the floor and my voice, right? And it gives your brain a little break from it. So that's grounding techniques. Gratitude, you're focusing on what's good in your life to try to balance it. Breathing exercises, I'd always heard all my life, well, take some deep breaths. It wasn't until just a few years ago I learned the key is a long exhale. Because the long exhale turns on the part of your brain that calms you down. If you do a long inhale, it's going to turn on the part of your brain that wires you up, right? So one training I was in, the guy said, someone asked him, I get nervous when I'm going to give a speech. He said, when you give the speech, just say one more word before you breathe in. You're extending the exhale. So that's one you can do. Okay, so this is why it's hard to enact all this stuff, because of what's going on here. But if we can work through this stuff, we're going to do it less often. Now, John Gottman, the couples researcher, says this. Let's imagine that you are in your window of tolerance. You're in a calm place 50% of the time. Now you get in a relationship with somebody. And they're in theirs 50% of the time. You multiply 50% by 50%, you get 25%. So 75% of the time, one or both of you are geared up for a good argument. Now, Gottman says 50% is not realistic. He believes we're only in this 30% of the time, that we spend 70% of our time out here. Now you multiply 30 by 30, you get 9%. So he says 91% of the time, one or both of you are geared up and anxious and ready to react. And that's why relationships are so difficult. Now, the more we can open our window, we increase the odds. But to recognize we get in conflict because we're humans with a nervous system. And the more damage that's been done to the nervous system in our life, the smaller that window is. Okay. So let's do this. We won't have time to get to the questions. I'll save them for next week. Years ago, in my first counseling gig, I told you I'd worked in drug treatment for court-ordered drug treatment downtown Dallas. Okay? And one day, the person who had been teaching the anger management class quit. And they said, we need somebody to teach it. And they asked me, and I said, sure, I'll teach it in addition, right? So I go into the anger management class with the material, and I just blew it. I made a fool of myself. It was awful, right? I got in a fight with the anger management guys, right? So I got home that night, and I don't remember what happened, but I went off on my family. I went off on my wife and my kids to the point of absolute embarrassment. And so I called up my therapist and got in to see him and told him about this. And I said, I'm embarrassed. I'm supposed to be the anger management guy. So why did I do this? And he said something that has stuck with me. He said, the goal is not that you never get angry again, because that's not realistic. We're looking for 3 areas of improvement. 1 is you get angry less often. 2, when you get angry, it's not as extreme. And 3, when you get angry, you make repair quicker. Okay? And what I've learned is it's that third one that we need to focus on. To say, I'm just not going to get angry on the front end, usually doesn't work. But if we'll start with trying to make repair when it happens, the more you do that, it's rewiring your brain so it's less likely to happen on the front end. Because you're now getting in touch with what are those stories and experiences that I'm reacting to, And as I rewire those, I get less reactive on the front end. So years ago when my boys were little, my wife and I went to vacation in the Florida Panhandle. And when we were leaving, we go to a gas station and fill up and everything. And I don't remember what brought it on, but we got in an argument and we didn't talk for 4 states. Right? Just driving, right? Years later, after I learned this stuff, we went to Florida, and lo and behold, we went to a gas station, and we're filling up, and my wife and I got into it. And I'll tell you what it was. I like Coke Zero. I'll drink Diet Coke, but I prefer Coke Zero over Diet Coke. And so I filled the car up while she went in with the boys, and I go in and she's standing at the cash register with the boys, and a Coke Zero and candy and all the stuff for them. And so I walk back to the cooler, and I can't find the Coke Zeros anywhere. And so I walk back up and I say, hey, honey, where'd you get that Coke Zero? And she goes, you just got to dig for it. Right? So I go back and I can't find it. I buy a Diet Coke. By this time, they're in the van, and I buy my Diet Coke, and I go out there, and I put it in the cup holder. I'm mad. I can't believe you would talk to me like that, right? And she kindly switches them. She's going to give me her Coke Zero. And I grabbed those and I switched them back. And I said, I don't like the way you talk to me in there, right? No, actually what I did, we started driving, it was quiet. And I thought about this stuff and went, all right, I need to tell her what I'm feeling. Talk about your own backyard. I wanted to just keep my mouth shut, but I know we're going to drive 4 states again in misery, right? So I said, I didn't like the way you talked to me in there. And she said, well, I was busy and I didn't like it that you came up and said, go get me a Coke Zero. I said, I didn't say that. Well, she was so stressed with the boys that when I said, where did you find the Coke Zero? Her mind heard, go get me a Coke Zero, right? And so she reacted. Well, when she reacted, my system went, don't you ever talk to me like that, right? And I got my little childish stuff. But the good news was we talked it out within 15 minutes. And the rest of the trip went great. Okay? So, a lot of times we're not going to be able at this point to prevent these arguments on the front end, but what we can do is take these skills and apply them on the back end. Hey, can we talk about what happened? And I've learned that if my wife and I get in an argument and I go for a drive and I spend the time thinking, poor pitiful me, how dare, right? That's a waste of time. When I go, okay, let's think it through. What did I hear or see? What's the story I told myself and what emotions did it create? Then my system calms down. And then I text her. I need to apologize for my behavior. I heard this, and I told myself this, and I felt this, and I reacted badly, and I never should have said or done that. And I'll get a text back, I'm sorry too. Right? And that's what we're looking for. Okay? So, next week, we'll address, I've got a couple of questions here. If you've got more questions, remember, go to your QR code and you can type them in there. So be thinking about how to practice your listening skills without reacting, right? You're going to reflect back. That's it for tonight.